Have you ever met a serial killer? I think I did, and I'm relieved that I didn't know it at the time. I used to chat a lot on MSN Messenger when I was in college. I was a shy and kind of nerdy girl, so talking and flirting with random guys was much easier when it was online instead of in the real world. We used to have a lot of internet stores that you could go and pay a couple of bucks and use the computer a couple times a week. I mean, it was the early 2000s, and technology wasn't available to everyone just yet. Sometimes it was just writing, and sometimes we'd use the cameras. There was this one guy that I remember really well. He was a lawyer, or so he said. He always refused to use the camera, even after we'd known each other for about a year. He was witty and funny, and I really liked him. He was a little bit older than me, and he was pretty good at sex talk, which was somehow appealing to a girl in her late teens. He was always asking personal questions. Where do you live? Do you live alone? Do you live with your family? Do you have a boyfriend? Can you travel alone? Of course, I always diluted the conversation and never gave him any information. Sometimes I would tell him a fake story, but then he would ask details, and I would end up telling him that it was fake and laughing about it. You would think it would bother him, but it didn't. He would always laugh and say it was just my wild imagination. I think our virtual relationship lasted for about 3 years. Now that I'm thinking about it, it lasted until I graduated college. One time he came to town where I was living. I was in my senior year. He said it was for work and insisted that we meet up. I agreed and told him about a coffee place where I like to drink coffee. He declined and said he had to work all day and that he'd be available after 9 p.m. and proposed that we meet in the apartment where he was staying. I thought it was weird, but at the same time I was excited and eager to meet him in real life. I finally agreed and told myself I'll just pass by and say hello and that'll be that. We agreed to meet the following day. He sent me the address, and because I know the area, I knew I would find my way easily. Unfortunately, that day at university, we had to prepare for a conference, me and a group of friends. The meeting took us longer than I'd planned, so I sent a message to the guy telling him that I had an unexpected bit of work to finish and I couldn't make it. He never responded, and I never heard from him again. A few years passed, and I moved to another city where I was pursuing a PhD. One day, out of nowhere, I received a mail from this guy. It was just a regular mail, where he was asking how I was doing and what I'd been up to lately. Honestly, I was a little bit surprised. We exchanged a few emails after that, and he told me he'd be happy to meet up if I was able to make time for him. That made me laugh. I thought, well, maybe it's time to finally meet this guy. Where I was living happened to be an hour away from the city he was living in. After a few back and forths and some more emails, he gave me the address. The location struck me as odd, but I didn't really think about it at the time. It was a bit out of the way, in a city I had visited a few times before. It was a new neighborhood. I didn't even think people were living there yet. The way I was supposed to get to his house was a bit weird, too. He said he would guide me on the phone and tell me how to get to his place. I took the train anyway, arriving at the station, and took a cab as I headed towards his neighborhood. I had to stop in an intersection and follow his instructions on the phone as he said. When the cab arrived at the intersection, the driver asked me if I was sure where I was going. I lied and told him this was the right area. I was surrounded by suburb villas, the kind with high walls and well-maintained front trees. It was a bit unnerving as I walked on the street where he said he lived. It was quiet. Too quiet. At the end of the street, there was a dozen duplexes with well-maintained hedges instead of fences. The street was empty but for 2 cars that passed by before I took a turn into an alleyway. I called him and he took me from there. I followed his instructions until I stopped in front of a duplex with a garage and a well-maintained front lawn. There was no car outside, and all the windows seemed to be closed but on the upper floors. A space in front of the garage was unexpectedly clean, and for a moment I thought maybe I had missed the right house. That's when I heard him say on the phone, "I can see you. Come on ahead inside." Then I looked up and saw the curtain dropping. I felt a real sense of unease, but I ignored it. "Come on, don't be silly. I know this guy for almost 6 years. I'll finally get to meet him in person," I said to myself. I stepped towards the front door, pushed it when I came inside. It was the entrance to the duplex, leading up to a small lobby with stairs. The lobby was completely quiet, as if no one else lived here. I was about to close the door when, for some reason, I decided not to close it and just push it quietly. I went upstairs and saw number 11 on the door on the right. Before I could tap on the woody door, he opened it wildly. The inside of the apartment was kind of dark because of the lack of natural light. He stood there, wearing a black shirt and gray pants and bare feet, which was odd. He was partially bald and neatly shaved. He smiled and stuck his hand out for me to shake. "Well, hello there. You finally decided to do it, huh?" Something in his features was unsettling, as if he was up to something. It was as if I could see in his cold gray eyes something I couldn't explain that made me feel in danger. I reached out my hand to greet him. The moment his hand touched mine, a chill ran down my spine. "Yeah, finally," I responded out of politeness. My uneasiness must have shown on my face. He shook my hand, but he didn't let go of it, and his grip tightened. "I don't like it. I don't like this at all." "You can let go of my hand now," I said, with false amusement. He grinned, but he didn't let go. At that instant, I went into fight-or-flight mode. My heart started racing, and all my senses went crazy. He grabbed my hand and tried to pull me inside. I threw politeness out the window and yelled, "Let go of me! I said let go!" I was standing on the threshold. I gripped the wall with my left hand and tried to pull away from him. When I looked up, I saw the creepy expression of a predator and a smile that said, "I finally got you." I was not only trapped, but I also knew that no one would hear me outside the duplex. Even if someone could hear me, they'd have no idea where the screams were coming from. He wasn't a big guy. He was around my height and maybe a little overweight. Otherwise, he was able to easily overwhelm me. So I took my chance and let go of the wall and stepped inside. It caught him off guard, and I grabbed the doorknob with my left hand and began to slam the door repeatedly on his arm as he tried to walk me inside. He finally let go of my hand, and I heard a grunt as he fell over inside. I thanked God for my decision to leave the front door open. I ran through the quiet alleyway without looking back until I reached the intersection. I looked behind me, but I saw no one, so I continued running. I couldn't find any cabs in the area, so I ran nearly 10 minutes before spotting a cab. While running after him, I yelled the taxi down and waved my hands. He must have seen me in his rearview mirror because he came to a complete stop. I dashed to the cab, shaking uncontrollably as I got inside. The driver gave me a wide look and was about to ask me a question when I blurted out, "To the train station. Please, hurry." He gave me a brief look before resuming the drive. I arrived at the station, purchased a ticket, and then boarded the first train to my hometown. I switched off my phone because I was afraid that he would call or message me. When I arrived, I went to the train station convenience store and pretended to look for something. I knew they'd have cameras there, so if he followed me, I'll be caught on camera. I spent nearly 10 minutes wandering between the aisles. Finally, I went up to the cashier and bought a bottle of water. On my way home, I took 2 cabs in opposite directions to confuse anyone that was following me. I didn't feel safe until I got home and shut the door. For a brief moment, I considered calling the police, but what would I say to them? He didn't do anything. I hadn't been harmed, and I'm an adult who understands what I was doing. I cursed my stupid lack of self-preservation. I told no one about this misadventure and vowed never to go through another dangerous situation like this again. I never heard from the guy after that, but it took several months for me to completely forget about the encounter and move on with my life. Until this morning, that is, when I was reading the newspaper and noticed a familiar face, a face I'd never forget. The photo was titled MSN Predator, the serial killer who lured his victims to his home and never let them leave. According to the article, all 24 victims were young women between the ages of 17 and 23, whom the killer met on Messenger. During the interrogation, the defendant stated that some of his victims had been chatting with him for more than 2 years, and only one girl had slipped between his fingers twice, as he put it, because she was somehow smarter than the others. Everyone knows that dreams are strange, but people often say they have deeper meanings. The details of your dreams vanish in an instant, leaving only faint impressions behind. I have to admit, I've tried to remember my dreams, especially back when I was in therapy after a bad car accident. My therapist suggested I log the details of my dreams to help with the healing process. I'm doing well now, but I remember searching online for websites that could help me remember my dreams more clearly. Like those who seek to experience lucid dreaming. That's when I came across a website I often visited called dreamstorm.com. It started when a friend messaged me asking how I was doing. I replied and asked if he knew of any websites that could help me with dream recall. About 12 minutes later, just as I was heading to the fridge for a snack, he finally responded. Dreamstorm.com, he wrote, mentioning he'd seen it discussed on a subreddit. He said it was weird, but might be useful for my problem. I clicked on the link he sent, and it opened a forum website. The site featured several videos linked to YouTube, mostly about healthy sleep habits. The design was reminiscent of Reddit or 4chan, yet it felt oddly comforting. The background was gray, and the website's logo was a brain with a pentacle in the center. The symbol surprised me. I thought my friend might have sent me to some weird occult site, but I decided to check it out. Each thread had a different topic related to dreams, but some were a bit off. The first thread I clicked on was about illustrations people had made based on what they vaguely remembered from their dreams. As I scrolled through, I saw a series of drawings that made me feel increasingly uncomfortable. I'll try to describe the illustrations as best I can. Blind Pig Jim. The illustration was drawn in a sketchbook. It depicted a tall, lanky, shirtless old man wearing a mask that resembled a pig's face. The background featured a series of houses in a surreal landscape, with the sun displaying a disturbingly realistic face. The artist commented, "I had a dream where I was being watched by this guy in a pig mask. The sun was always singing a strange song about flowers. Every time I walked into a house, it was empty, except for a jar of human eyeballs in the center." Window Watchers. This artwork was unsettling, to say the least. It showed a small sketch of a bedroom from the perspective of somebody sitting on a bed. The room contained various objects, a dresser with knobs replaced by staring eyes, a tall lamp in the corner. At first, nothing seemed unusual until I noticed, thanks to the comments, a man standing behind the window, staring with huge dilated eyes and a sick, perverted smile. The artist didn't provide a proper comment, just a poem. Window watcher, passing through, watching you sleep, is all he do. He picks a friend, I wonder who. Close your blinds, shame on you. You're gonna make him feel so blue. Oh, so sad, boo-hoo-hoo. God is here. This was more of a doodle. It depicted a man standing in front of 3 obelisks that seemed to stare at him. Above them was a singular being, distorted by scribbles, with clouds of smoke presented similarly about him. There was no comment, and I assume the title served as the description. A lot of these illustrations were disturbing, but those 3 stuck with me the most. As I scrolled through the threads, I noticed several people describing similar dreams, which only added to my discomfort. Feeling unsettled, I closed the website and shut down my computer. It was already around 2 or 3 a.m., and I realized I'd been exploring the site for quite some time. climbed into bed, hoping for some rest, but as soon as I drifted off, I found myself back in my chair. I walked towards my bedroom door, but when I opened it, my house had transformed into a cold concrete staircase. I ascended the steps, feeling a growing sense of dread, until I reached a red metal door. I grasped the handle and tried to open it. Then suddenly, I woke up. I couldn't move for a while after waking up, struggling to process what might have been behind that door in my dream. Eventually, I got out of bed, turned on my computer, and went back to the website. As soon as it loaded, I found one of the threads and posted about my dream. After a few minutes, somebody replied, saying they had experienced something similar. However, instead of the red metal door being at the top of a staircase, it was in their house. Several more people began commenting on my post, sharing their own stories about the red metal door. I kept scrolling through the forums, delving deeper and deeper into every thread, trying to understand what my dreams could mean. It wasn't just about other dreams. What did mine say about me? I continued until I encountered a thread titled Sigmund AVI. I clicked on it and saw that most of the posts were about nightmares, many with accompanying videos. There were too many to describe in full, but here are the ones that stood out. Melody AVI. The video was set at night in a playground. A faint, melancholy groaning could be heard, as if someone or something was singing in pain. The camera panned across the playground, then focused on a colorful structure. There, a creature with a mutilated face stared directly at the camera. It looked like a man whose neck had been twisted and mangled, with no eyelids. The video ended abruptly with the creature's face filling the screen, sending chills down my spine as I stared at it. Wishwatch, MP4. The video began with static, then cut to a clip of a person sleeping in bed. The cameraman silently watched the person for about 12 minutes. As the person began to stir and wake up, the cameraman suddenly fled and the video cut off. The comment section was flooded with links to the window watcher drawing, repeating over and over. Some commenters dismissed the video as a reenactment of the artwork, but something about it felt disturbingly real to me. Sadwalker AVI. The video wouldn't play. I tried multiple times, but it remained stuck on the first frame. A disfigured man in a trench coat and a fedora, standing on a dark street. The comments explained that the video was broken, likely taken down by the original poster, but the corrupted file somehow remained online. One commenter who had seen the video before it was removed described it as showing the disfigured man walking down the street and eventually killing a dog in a blind fit of rage. I was relieved I didn't have to see the gore described by that commenter. I wouldn't want to witness such a thing. Several of these videos were somewhat related to dreams, but most were simply disturbing. I continued exploring the threads of the forum, skipping the videos and reading several posts about dreams, some more unsettling than others. Eventually, I decided to leave the forum and return to the softer, more popular section of the websites that weren't as horrifying as Sigmund AVI. I was about to go back to the illustration thread when I noticed something off about the website's logo. It usually featured a pentacle inside of a brain, but now it displayed a Greek letter instead. I clicked on it and a black background appeared on my screen, with the same red metal door from my dream. I moved my mouse towards it and clicked it. The page took me back to the website, but now it's different. The forums were all gone, replaced by a single message, undergoing repairs. I decided to close the window and turn off my computer. It was about 5 p.m. I went about my day, but a few hours later, I returned to my computer and found that the website was gone. Everything had been deleted, and I searched for any information about what had happened to Dreamstorm.com. I checked other websites, trying to find anything about it, but several people commented that it had never existed. I even asked my friend about it, but he claimed not to know what I was talking about. I showed him our message as proof that he had sent me the website, but he just gave me a confused look. The link he had sent wasn't to Dreamstorm.com, but to a Wikipedia article about dreams. If anyone has any information about Dreamstorm.com, please let me know as soon as possible. Hi guys, not sure if this is the right place for it, but I thought that if anyone would be interested in my story, then it'd probably be the people here. So I moved into a new place recently. It's a pretty good spot, nice and quiet, right at the edge of town. The rent's really decent as well, especially for a newly renovated apartment in this area of London. Apparently the building's been around for ages, and the location isn't super ideal for a lot of people, so they had to keep the rent low. No complaints from me though. I don't have a car, and I can cycle pretty easily to the nearby station. Moving in was straightforward enough, and I'm pretty satisfied with the place so far. Here's where it gets a little weird. Shortly after settling in, I noticed that a patch of loose carpet was right at the threshold between where the bedroom connects to the living room. Now normally, I would have just called the landlord to fix it, but it didn't seem like a big enough deal at the time. Thought I'd take care of it myself, save some cash in the process, right? Upon looking at the carpet more closely, I found something a bit unusual. There was a little gap where the carpet seemed to sag. When I pulled the carpet back, I found a little patch, no wider than my fist, where it looked like the floorboard had decayed, revealing a subfloor beneath. It was a bit like poking a hole in the top layer of foil on one of those prepackaged meals. A little peephole revealing everything that was beneath. I'm a pretty curious guy by nature, so couldn't help but shine a torch in there and have a quick peek. I wasn't expecting much, but to my surprise, right beneath the hole, there sat an unassuming little object. It was a squarish shape, which barely stood out amongst the dust, dirt, and mold. When I first saw it, I thought it was a tablet, an iPad, or a Kendall or something. With a coat hanger, some mounting tape, and a lot of practice, I eventually managed to fish it out. Out in the light, I could see that it was in fact not an iPad, like I had hoped, but a little hardcover-bound book. Though the exterior was essentially eaten away by black mold, I could still make out a single word impressed upon the faded leather cover. Journal. Inside, the pages were in pretty bad shape. The first half of the journal was irretrievable, mold-stained and practically crumbling to the touch, and I could barely leaf through them without causing irreversible damage. The back half wasn't much better, with a good portion of it torn out or, strangely enough, burned. In addition, a lot of the writing itself was illegible, either crossed out, faded, or too frantically scrawled to be comprehensible. Around the margins and in the spaces between the words, I could make out strange sketches, shapes of figures that are hard to describe. I'll see if I can upload some photos later. The contents are unusual, if not disturbing. It's a little disparate because of how much of the text is unreadable, but I've transcribed the parts I could make out and ordered them chronologically here. Let me know what you guys think. Journal entry. Monday, April 4th, 1953. Recently I've been feeling unwell. Upon returning from my latest trip to the east, I found that my whole body aches, and I'm constantly stricken by bouts of weakness and fatigue. I cannot stand for long, as the world spins when I'm upright. Most concerning, I seem to be experiencing hallucinations, strange visual distortions, which addle both my mind and my depth perception. Stranger still, I no longer dream. Doctors have attributed it to an exotic ailment, exposure to miasmas or viral disease, an insect bite maybe. The source varies with each practitioner I meet. I don't know when this started. I don't recall the reason that I went to Asia in the first place. Friday, April 29th, 1953. Symptoms have descended upon me quickly, like a fog. In addition, my recollection has become hazy as well. I'm unable to recall what it feels like to be without malaise. I have no recollection of my travels now. If it were not in this journal, I would not know that I had traveled at all. The doctors attribute this state of being to a range of ailments. It differs with every visit. Bilious fever, illness in the ears or eyes or brain, even hormonal imbalances because my state of paranoia and neurosis. Yet, the tests have been fruitless. Physically, my body is not inconsistent with the body of a perfectly healthy human being. At this point, I care not about the cause. The symptoms are all I experience, and the brief respite from these afflictions is my only desire. Wednesday, June 15th, 1953. As my condition worsens, more unique symptoms have come to the surface. In the past, I have written in my journal to distract myself from the turbulent environment around me, but now, when I must put pen to paper, I've been unable to conjure neither the words nor the images necessary to describe my past experiences. I can only focus on my present state, of the world which appears before my sensations in the here and now. In the future, I might look back on these entries and recall this affliction which had ailed me for so long. But I'm doubtful. Thoughts of the future are becoming hazy also. Sunday, June 19th, 1953. These visions, they have only grown in vividness and intensity. No longer are they simply the distortions in shapes and colors in the ordinary objects. Now, entirely new objects have emerged. Like balloon animals being inflated, thin figures billow outward, creating uneven, grotesque forms. Almost always they are bulbous, organic things, bulging and pulsating before my eyes. July 2nd, 1953. Day uncertain. As I grow more accustomed to these visions, their features become more distinguished. What once was just vague, opaque blobs have now become strangely defined substances, or perhaps even organisms of a sort, perhaps even flora. Although they vary greatly in shape, color, and size, it is clear that there exists a certain resemblance between some more than others. It's possible they even belong to specific and distinct genre. But enough of this. To categorize hallucinations like they were undiscovered zoological species is an act that even my addled brain can recognize as insanity. July 1953. They've begun moving now. Soundlessly they creep across my sightline, some locomoting like caterpillars, while others slink on wireframe feet. These feet-thin feelers, reminiscent of an ant's antenna, poke and probe the ground ahead, as if searching for stable ground. Dozens of these feelers extend from below their bodies, globular, ovid masses, which appear as smooth as they are pliant. Others sit upon stem, like detached eyes floating in place. On more than one occasion, I've seen small ones collide, merge, and become one entity. Some of the larger ones, in fact, appear as a collection of small globules, orbs upon its body so numerous that it simulates fur. I can only wonder if they're a singular organism or simply a congregation of them moving as one. In these pages, I see that I have once referred to them as flora. I now see that that was an error. Yet neither are they fauna. They're a sort of combination, not quite animal, not quite plant. July 1953. They're everywhere. I've seen them creep across my page. I've seen them loom outside my window. They're not visions. I've reached out and touched them. The one I felt was chewing gum colored. It was warm and fleshy to the touch. 1953. Perhaps they've always been there. Silent, numerous, invisible to the human eye. Perhaps my affliction is not an illness, but insight. I've gained access to a world truer than my own, but this is no blessing. To watch and feel these things creep over my body, pulse on my bed, cast their shadows over my building, it is something no man should see. Date uncertain. I awoke with one of them in my mouth. It crawled out so easily, as mundane as a laborer leaving their family home for work. It left a slick and pungent trail behind. Tasted like gasoline. How long had it resided within me? How many of these creatures had I unknowingly ingested in my lifetime? My throat burns as I retch. Amongst the remains of my last meal, things shift and slither. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Date uncertain. To my family, if I had one, please burn this diary if you were ever to find it. I would do it myself, but I fear to exit my drawing room. In fact, I'm no longer able to stand at all. Fixed to my writing chair, I can only sprawl upon the page, gazing out of my window to watch the world become unrecognizable before my eyes. I see them. Even when I close my eyes, I see them. They live beneath my eyelids, beneath my skin. I fear that they see me. There are a few places you know where you shouldn't bleed, I'm sure. Shark-infested waters, anywhere in bear country, and in polite company. Sure, but you're forgetting the Midwest. It's pretty much bred into us, even though we don't see it directly when growing up. You come back inside for dinner when the bell rings, or Mom screams bloody murder over whatever game you're playing in the woods or the corn. If your parents are generous, you can go out after dark and catch fireflies. But make sure you wear your shoes. Don't go too close to the woods, or a branch might poke your eye out. All that sort of talk. What they don't tell you, or even usually know in earnest, is that you shouldn't bleed after dark. It's not the predators, mind you. The worst we have here are coyotes, and they're usually more afraid of you than you are of them. Usually, there's a few examples of kids being ripped apart by then, but those rarely reach the news because something else is actually to blame. A satanic ritual where the kids rip the child in question apart, while their own tears stream in fat rivulets, while their friends screamed for mercy and their parents listened horrified, but understandingly from a balcony not a quarter-mile away. The parents never blamed the children for what they had done to survive in this place. Something made them know that it had to be done. You see, the land once belonged to the natives. They walked this land and knew its habits and its hungers. They knew how to appease it, how to placate it long enough so that its hunger wouldn't consume them whole. The white men came barreling in here thinking they knew how to appease it, and ironically, we accidentally did. Pig farms, you see, generate a lot of blood that must be drained, and this blood might as well be processed into fertilizer. This blood placates the soil here, which hungers for a blood of any type. It's a good source of nitrogen, some farmers say, but the old farmers, more gristle than muscle, remember what it really is. It's a sacrifice to the land. So, let me tell you a story from my childhood as to why you should never bleed after dark in the Midwest. I was 13, my cousin Zach was 14, and my friend was about the same age. My mom let us go collect fireflies after dark, which is harmless enough. The land is usually quite respectful of property, and my mother, like her mother's mother, buried those witch bottles filled with piss after childbirth, with nails and broken glass around the edges of the property to demarcate the family domain. It's hollowed the ground, though our ignorant children's minds didn't register her declaration that we were only safe on family property. My cousin Zach was the one to dare us into the field beyond the farm. I knew better, or at least I should have, but after a triple dog dare, the most sacred of all dares, I went first into the cutting dry corn husks of late September. I felt them scratch me as I ran into the forest of uniform corn stalks. Despite the minuscule pain, I giggled, knowing that I was breaking one of my mother's biggest rules: do not enter the cornfield after dark, or you'll get lost. I was a smart kid, and I knew this because everyone told me so I figured I could find my way back. The moon was high, and if I just headed away from it, then I'd be fine. I heard my friends come charging in behind me, laughing and scrambling through the razor-sharp corn, but not quite behind me. I looked down at my arms and saw tiny, slightly bloody scratches along them, and could only imagine that I had them on my shins and face as well. The worst cut was on my left outside wrist, and I caught the sight of the first rivulet of blood falling, almost in slow motion, as it fell to the dry and thirsty soil below me. Even in the moonlight, I could see that was where the blood had hit the soil, cratering it. The soil around it darkened dramatically, as if I poured a bottle of water into it, and the soil, the best I can describe it, is that it drank me in. It knew me now. My blood ran cold, and I shouted out to my friends and to Zach that I thought we should leave. As the purple vines began spilling up from that first drop, it became an existential fear in me. I bolted back the way I'd come. I know I was only a dozen rows or so inside the field, but as I ran and ran, I quickly became aware that either I was running in the wrong direction, or that suddenly direction was meaningless. The soil had tasted my blood, and it would have me. I'll spare you the details, but give you the highlights and let you fill in the rest. I'm sure that whatever you imagine is only half as awful as what I saw that night. First, I came across Zach. He was bleeding all over from faint scratches that bled more than they had any right to do, and I knew that the land would never let him leave. He had stripped off his bloody long-sleeve shirt to inspect where exactly he was bleeding from. He was more perplexed than anything, and obliviously told me that I had lost the game of hide-and-seek, since he was the seeker. I put on his blood-soaked shirt and sprinted through the corn, the sound of him screaming to come back here in anger, followed by the shrieking pain he must have felt as the husk ripped his skin from him with every step. It'll haunt me forever. Despite himself, he couldn't help but follow the blood on his shirt until every piece of him was skinned away by the blades we ran through. Next, my best friend. I keep his name a secret so as to keep him safe, but I found him digging a hole to escape the sharp edges around him. I told him to stop digging because the very soil below him wanted him. That's what my mom used to say anyway. He curled into a ball, afraid to move an inch, lest one of the stalks come closer to him. I told him I'd get help and to stay as still as he could. Lastly, I saw a glowing flame. I ran towards it, my cousin's long-sleeve shirt protecting me from the lashing leaves and jagged soil when I tripped. Blood still dripped from painless razor cuts all across me, but not as badly as Zach. When I arrived, my mom was already gone. She sat there on her knees, holding something I can only hope was not a baby, smoldering amidst a circle of burning corn stalks that seemed to never run out of fuel. My throat was choked with the scent of my mother's burning hair, and my eyes streamed with both the smoke and my abysmal feeling of loss and loneliness. I ran, I ran and I ran, and I awoke my father when I broke through the forest of corn, screaming bloody murder. My mother was dead, my cousin was bleeding, my best friend was hiding in a hole. At the end of it, my mother was proclaimed missing, though everyone in town showed it in their eyes that they both pitied me and respected my mother's sacrifice. My best friend was committed to an institute for a while, and we fell apart, but he lived. My cousin, on the other hand, was, according to the news, ripped apart by coyotes. So, thus the whole county went hunting for coyotes, shooting them dead, burning them, leaving them to rot. Do you see what I mean? Zach and my mother were only pawns in the end. The land got the blood of 1,000 coyotes out of this little adventure, but one problem remains. Despite my mother's knowledge of the old ways, the land remembers my taste. I was driving back home to see my dad after years away from this awful place. I hit a pothole the size of Kansas that took my front tire clean off. My phone calls and texts won't go through. My phone's been at 23% for entirely too long. It has easily been days, but nothing has changed. The sky is still black. The moon is the same as it had been when I left years ago. The clock hasn't moved an inch, but I know only how long it's been because of sleep, hunger, and thirst. I have a middling understanding of tech, and I've wrote a script to post this message once my laptop gets signal again. The corn grows so close to these roads, and only seems to grow closer the further down the road I look. It will know my taste again. I'm coming, Zach. If you get this message, friend, know that this country knows your taste, and you are more than welcome to come here and feed it. Run away to the desert. It's not safe to bleed here. Me, Charlie Baker, and Marcus Kennedy sat by the campfire with our Cub Scout troop. 3 best friends, all enjoying each other's company. Charlie was in the middle of one of his infamous scary stories. He was always the best storyteller. Everyone could joke that one day he would become an author or something. Gosh, if only that were true. If only he'd just made it past that night. Charlie reached the climax of his story, and we all screamed as the character of the story was attacked by an axe-wielding, goat-headed man. Then it ended, and our screams of terror turned into affirmations and applause. As usual, it was a great story. The others started to tell their scary stories. Marcus told a story about a hook-handed man nailing people to the front door. Another scout told a story about a werewolf stalking a family on the night of the full moon, but none of them matched. None of them reached the terrifying level of Charlie's story. We'd always wondered about his secret, how he'd gotten so good, but he always told us that it just came naturally to him. We didn't believe that, but it was mostly because we still hoped that we'd be as good as him someday. After a long while of sitting by the fire, I noticed Charlie slip away from the fire, exclaiming that he was tired. Not too much later, I agreed with the sentiment and retreated to our tent. It was quite a distance away from the others. I was still warm from the fire and pulled myself into my sleeping bag next to Charlie. I was out. My sleep was good, long and peaceful. That's how it should be, but it was interrupted. That night I experienced something that has haunted me to this very day. It started with me sitting up in the tent next to Charlie. I was hearing things outside, strange grunts, and what I can only describe as barking purrs. They were odd. I can't really describe it, but they almost had a bird-like quality to them. Along with the strange noises were heavy footsteps in the leaves. With every footstep, I slowly began to realize how big the thing must be. I looked around, every which way, worried about what could be outside. Bracing myself, I put a hand against the nylon wall, only to feel something press against it on the other side. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My body, seemingly in a state of shock, wouldn't let me move. The sounds the creature was making shifted. The barking purr-like sound slowly shifted into this low, droning growl. I shook so violently I thought I might pass out. I'd never heard anything like it. There was absolutely nothing to compare it to. With this new sound came a new, horrible, overwhelming feeling. Dread. That was the feeling that came over me. It was so incredibly all-encompassing that I couldn't move. It was so immense that I felt like I was being suffocated by the emotions. But I don't even know how that's possible. It felt like I was drowning, like one of those nightmares when you're in a car slowly sinking deeper and deeper into the ocean. You know, there's nothing you can do to escape, so you just sit there and shake, dreading your inevitable death. That was the feeling that came over me in that tent. Then another sensation hit me. It wasn't a feeling, it was like something much worse, something much more physical. The smell. The putrid smell of the thing almost made me want to puke. It smelled like a massive dumpster of burning trash, but there was something else there too. The horrible smell of something dead, something rotting. It smelled like how I'd always thought a skunk would smell. A wet, dead, horrible smell that just makes you wish to never smell again. I wanted to cover my mouth, but I was so afraid I just sat there, drowning in fear and that horrid aroma. I listened to heavy footsteps patrolling around the tent. They rustled the dry leaves and broke branches. It kept going in a concentric circle that slowly seemed to close in on the tent. Suddenly, I began to regret putting our tent so far away from the others. That afternoon, I'd convinced Charlie to help me move it farther from the others. We both liked to go to sleep early and hated being kept up by the other scouts' endless chatter. It was getting closer. Its heavy footsteps grew louder and louder. I imagined the thing growing larger and larger, seeming to feed off my fear. I shook. I wanted to be anywhere but here. I wanted to escape, to see my mom, my dad, my brothers, anyone, and anywhere but here. Then I heard things begin to drag against the nylon of the tent. It sounded scratchy and weird. It sounded similar to nails on a chalkboard, mixed with the sound of dragging your nails on a piece of nylon. The noise of the dragging on the nylon was so shrill it stung my ears, but I was so frozen with dread and fear that I couldn't do anything. I didn't reach to cover them, afraid somehow that it would know I'd moved. I felt weak. I wanted to do something, to move, to scream, but my petrified body refused. I felt lightheaded. I felt sick to my stomach. The smell, the sound, the fear, it all felt so overwhelming. It lasted hours. The whole time I felt I was on the verge of puking or screaming, but I could do nothing but sit there and listen. At some point, a light drizzle began. At first, I hoped that it might drown out the horrible sound, but it might also protect me from the unknown that I so desperately did not want to face. Instead, it just added to the cacophony of horror and terror. It felt like I was on my breaking point. I still sat there, absolutely petrified. My eyes followed the footsteps as they slowly made their way around the tent. Each heavy thump sent a shiver down my spine, reminding me of the immense size and power of whatever horrible thing was out there. That's when I heard it, the sound of ripping nylon. I looked to see something cutting through the tent wall along the zipper. Or, I don't know if cutting would be the right word. It was more like an exact rip from a cut. I looked to see what it was, but it was too dark. I watched the dark shape slowly rip further and further down until there was a gash, from top to bottom of the tent. I shook so violently that I had to assume the thing or the person knew I was there. Once the large gash had been made, something dark started to make its way into the tent. I looked, but the smell intensified as it approached. The smell was so bad that my eyes watered. It was such a thick, overpowering smell that it was choking me. I felt like I could taste it, and it was horrendous. I endured through the pain of my tears and looked once more. I saw it began to come inside. It was very large, very hairy. From the small amount I could see, it looked to be a limb. It reached into the tent, seemingly being careful not to let any more of its body in. Its limb, its arms, slunk further and further in, and I almost wanted to throw up. That thing, that arm, was way too big, way too long. It could reach from the door to me without even putting its shoulder into the tent. It felt so uncanny, so wrong. It looked like something you might see in a night terror. But the worst part was it was real. It seemed to reach around the tent, seemingly trying to find what was inside. When its arm bumped against my backpack, it grabbed hold of it with what seemed to be freakishly long fingers before slowly and eerily dragging the bag out of the tent. My fear didn't die, but gradually lessened, knowing that it was only here for that. The thing just wanted my bag. As it slowly lifted the backpack, it struggled. The large bag hardly fit through the hole. Little pieces and parts of it kept getting caught as the thing tried to yank it through. The still, omnipresent droning call was interrupted by a growl, followed by a loud rip. The bag disappeared through the now significantly larger hole. The hole flapped open and closed in the light breeze, and I could make out the massive dark shape of the creature. I looked away, horrified at the size of the thing. Silence for a split second. I listened to the thing as it rustled around with the bag, letting out slight grunts that sounded frustrated. It fiddled with the bag for an amount of time I can't determine, before it let out one especially loud grunt and a loud ripping sound, then a clatter of contents as my bag fell to the ground. I recognized all the different sounds, the thunk of my water bottle, the thump of my clothes, the crash of my utensils, the clinking crunch of a bag of chips. It fiddled around with the objects. Crack, the sound of it shattering something made me jump internally. I was still so scared of this thing. Up to this point, it hadn't actually shown any aggression. It had seemingly just been curious. But the mere thought of it breaking something changed that idea. I prayed in my head that this thing would go away. I just wanted to go back to sleep. I didn't care if it took my things or whatever. As long as it didn't hurt me, I didn't care. I listened to the shrill noise of a plastic bag of chips being torn apart. Heavy snuffling followed, and I could vaguely hear the crunching of the thing eating a chip. It ate all the other chips as slowly as it had eaten the first. It seemed to be enjoying them, taking its time with each individual delicacy. Once it was done, I felt through the ground its weight shift back towards the tent. My heart started thundering like it was a marathon runner. That temporary relief had been destroyed in a mere instant. The horrible call began to come again, and all the fear returned in full, overwhelming force. Unable to move still, I watched helplessly as the arm forced its way back through the hole. I felt its long, wet fingers briefly brush against my sleeping bag. They were so long. They reminded me of gnarled branches or the long legs of some spider thing. The fingers seemed to examine the bag for a second before pulling it. My life flashed before my eyes. Me, a 10-year-old boy, had to consider that I might be about to die, that something that shouldn't exist was about to drag me out and kill me. I shifted slightly, petrified, imagining it pulling me out and eating me whole. It let go of my bag. I closed my eyes in relief, praying it would just leave. but the arm slowly drifted to the other sleeping bag. Charlie. I'd been so terrified that I didn't even think about him, so occupied with my own well-being that I hadn't thought of my best friend. He lay next to me, still sleeping soundly with a slight grin on his face. I wanted to do something, to say something, but I could do nothing but stare as the thing began to grab at the end of his sleeping bag. Charlie didn't shake, didn't move, didn't even react. Time seemed to freeze as its hand glided to the end of his bag. It seemed to caress the bag for a moment before it gave a big yank. I felt his weight shift about within the confines of the tent. I can't explain, though Charlie seemed to satisfy it better. It got a tight grip on the bag and began pulling him out of the tent. It was prolonged, and he was slowly pulled out 1 inch at a time. His eyes opened wide, and without moving his head, he looked towards the hand. His face became flat with terror, but like me, he was frozen in fear as it slowly pulled him outside. His fear only seemed to grow when the end of the sleeping bag disappeared beyond the rip of the tent. Gradually, more and more were pulled out. I shook as one of my best friends disappeared through a hole in the tent wall. Just before he finally disappeared, his eyes met mine. They were terrified and seemed to plead for help, for someone to save him from this horrible fate. But there was no one. Once he was completely gone, I heard shuffling and fabric ripping as the sleeping bag was shredded. I imagined some giant with long fingernails clawing away at the helpless sleeping bag, trying to get at my friend. Then the ripping sound stopped, and I heard the slight thump through the pitter-patter of rain. Then the sleeping bag was thrown into the puddle with a splash, sounding much lighter now. It was then I realized that it had ripped him out of the bag and was now taking him away. I heard heavy footsteps growing fainter and fainter before fading away entirely. Once the footsteps couldn't be heard, the sound stopped. The horrible droning sound had finally stopped. Sobs and cries escaped my mouth, which quickly turned to agonized screams. I cried out words. I can't tell you what I said. I was in such a panic that it was just a word salad of pure panic thoughts. I think I may have said monster or Charlie, but I can't be sure. I heard the yelps and screams of the other scouts in reaction to my own. I shook in the corner of my tent as I heard my leader make his way over. I heard the thunk of his boots until they stopped. He hadn't reached my tent yet, so I couldn't comprehend why he'd stopped walking. Then he gasped. The thunking turned to a slam as he sprinted the rest of the way over and peeked inside the tent, calling our names. He saw me alone and shaking, too traumatized to even speak, besides a single phrase.